don't know of any living relatives of any of these people in this area. So based on historical records for Jackson County in the 1800s, bigamy was considered a serious crime, often tied to social, religious, and occasionally frontier violence contexts. Iowa Code defined it as a criminal act for a person to knowingly marry someone who already has a living spouse. So this is about bigamy and, where the multiple wives, they really weren't willing participants in being another wife. To this husband, they knew nothing about it. Grounds for divorce. So divorce in Iowa in 1858. The source was Every Woman, Her Own Lawyer by George Bishop, Dick, and Fitzgerald of New York. Iowa, divorces for bed and board are not granted in this state. A divorce from the bonds of matrimony will be decreed for the following reasons. And I'm just going to let you read those on the slide. So that's the only way you could get a divorce. I had to go with one of those 7 reasons.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like when I look over and see where people have gotten divorced, it seems like number 6 seems to be used a lot. The cruel and inhumane treatment. But I'm sure number 7, if you can't get along.
Or number 5 even.
Yeah. Oh, I might have spelled that word wrong. All right, moving along. So much of the information that I found in this presentation, I found it online, Iowa Genealogy Trails. Raise your hand if you've ever looked at that site. Okay. And actually, I'm hoping a lot of people don't just go and start reading all of this, because then it won't be interesting to them, because I do pick up a lot of things for topics from this. And that is my phone. Even though I have the volume turned off. Okay, so I want to give credit then to Mary Kate Krogman, who is a volunteer that transcribed a lot of this information on this site. And then I used a lot of newspaper articles as well. And I'm kind of appalled in a way, the information that these newspapers thought that they have the right to print about people. I mean, going around ruining their lives. And in one case, they even went to somebody on their honeymoon to let them know that, hey, she's already married. And it's just like, how did they do that? They were just like tracking these people. It's crazy. So we'll start with our first one, Orpha Lester Barrows. And he was the son of John William Barrows and Anna Webb. He was born in 1891 in Iowa Township in Jackson County. And on November 11, 1914, he married Sophia Peepgrass. She had immigrated to the U.S. from Denmark. And by 1930, Sophia was living in Davenport, and she was employed as a cigar bander. And then after her, marriage and subsequent divorce to Barrows, she did marry later in 1937 as well. So December 26, 1923, common law wife causes arrest of man when he returns to other woman, Mrs. Frida Barrows, common law wife of Orpha Barrows, 312 Western Avenue. And I don't find that address anymore, so that house is no longer there. And decided that the social law, which decrees that the woman always paid, would not work entirely in her case, and that the father of her 6-year-old boy should assume his share of the responsibility. On information sworn out by her, police arrested Barrows and a woman giving the name of Sophia Barrows, who claimed she was married to the man in 1914 in Maquoketa. And she really was, and they did still arrest her and hold her in jail. So, December 26, 1923, wedded and unwedded wives match claims for common husband. As a result of the stories told by the two women, Barrows will be given a hearing in police court tomorrow morning on a charge of bigamy. His bonds were fixed this morning at $500. It talks about $500 here, but later it talks about a different amount. And that was by Magistrate Metcalf. According to Sophia Barrows, the woman with whom Barrows was arrested, she and the man were married in Maquoketa in 1914 and lived together until 1917. And it was about that time that Barrows commenced coming here to see wife number 2. Then the war came. Barrows had promised to marry Frida. He told the authorities and renewed these promises when it was known that they would have a child. He went away to war, and I didn't see him again for a long time, she said. And then he came back, and we started living together as man and wife. But on November 19th, he left me and he did not come back. I made up my mind that he couldn't treat me as he had, and just tossed me aside. I wanted him to help support this boy and do the right thing. The wife supposed to have been married in Maquoketa is being held in the county jail pending an investigation of the records at Maquoketa. It is not likely that any charge will be placed against her, but that she will be held as a witness. Attorney B.T. O'Neill is representing Barrows. December 27th, bigamy trial is continued. Ortha Barrows, war veteran, is released under a bond of $300. The trial of Ortha Barrows, called husband by 2 women, was continued until January 5th in police court this morning at the request of the man's attorney. Bigamy charges were filed against Barrows when Frida Barrows, who claims she is his common-law wife and that 6-year-old Junior Barrows is his son, attempted to have him arrested for returning to his legal wife, Sophia Barrows. Frida Barrows declared that she had been deserted and left destitute with the little boy. It was apparent today that the defense will deny that Barrows ever contracted a common-law marriage with the unwedded wife, and that she had no claim on him. January 5th, 1924. Alleged bigamist fails to appear for hearing. Fear he has left the city. Ortha Barrows, arrested several weeks ago on a charge of bigamy, failed to appear in Davenport Police Court this morning when his case was called, and fear that he may have jumped his $300 bond was expressed this morning by John Swigan, Assistant County Attorney. Barrows knew that this case was coming up this morning, and unless something unexpected happened to keep him away, I don't know what his absence would mean unless he intended to jump his bond. Barrows' bond is held by W.J. Bryson, professional bondsman. Attorney Andrew Chesson, appearing for Barrows, appeared in police court and asked Magistrate Metcalf for more time to look for his client. He was confident that Barrows was in the city. He'd just forgotten. He'd forgotten about the date of the hearing. That's what his lawyer said. October 10th, 1924, annulment of the common law marriage of Frida Barrows and Ortha L. Barrows was effected before Judge W.W. Scott today on petition of the wife who alleged that Barrows already had a wife at the time he married her several years ago. The wife, Sophia Barrows, testified that at the time she married Barrows, he was a soldier, and that she had accompanied her husband to the Philippines where he was stationed. On returning to the U.S., Barrows' first wife appeared. The husband later disappearing. He had not been seen since. September 22nd, 1932. Husband, deserted by wife of 15 years, asked for divorce. Alleging that his wife deserted him 15 years ago, Ortha Barrows has filed action for divorce in Scott County District Court seeking separation from Mrs. Sophia Barrows. So that's the one he married legally. The couple, or really wasn't legal, I guess. The couple were married November 11, 1914. Barrows claimed that his wife deserted him February 1st, 1917. Well, because she found out about the other woman. And she's been gone since. So he had for attorneys Smith and Swift and Jan Maloney. Needed 3 of them, I guess, to get out of it. November 3rd, 1932. Ortha Barrows was granted a divorce from Sophia Barrows on the grounds of desertion. Now this next one might surprise you. November 5th, 1932, Miss Frida Bolge of Davenport, that was the common law wife, number one, and Ortha L. Barrows of Macocata were married at 8:30 this morning by Police Magistrate John T. Fowler. And her parents even came. They attended the couple. Mr. Barrows is a blacksmith. Ortha Lester Barrows died on January 3rd, 1958. His wife Frida survived him. No mention is made of his son Lester. He may have died in childhood. Ortha Barrows is buried in the Rock Island National Cemetery. Okay, so this one, you know, I kept reading it over and over, and I don't know how to present this without you getting confused. There's too many people involved. There just are. But anyway, the one that's from this area that got mixed up in this was Jenny Mae Springer. And she was the daughter of Emerson and Louisa Jane Springer, and she was born in Chicago in 1892. She married Arthur Helmuth Brimmer in 1913 in Jackson County. He was born in Hamilton County, Iowa. So in 1922, he married, okay, so I'm just gonna move ahead a little bit. So when all of this scandal and everything with all these people involved, he takes on a third wife, and she was a widow with 5 children, and then they ended up having 5 children. And they, you know, stayed together. They lived in Oklahoma, because I mean, you know, everything was ruined, their reputations by everything that was in the paper. So there, Arthur and his third wife, they're buried in California. So here is a picture of Arthur Helmuth Brimmer. It's pronounced Bremer or Brimmer, I'm not sure which. I've seen it spelled both ways. So this excerpt from the newspaper article that appeared November 27, 1922 in Marshalltown. A Tiernan Bremer Rash bigamy scandal. So the Rash, the last name of Rash is for the woman, and that was just 2 of her husbands, the Tiernan and the Bremer. So we'll get to more of that. So about 3 years ago, a local farm implement firm was in need of someone to demonstrate tractors. And the tractor company sent Arthur H. Bremer here. With Bremer was his wife, and that was the first woman that we talked about from Macocata. And after remaining here for some months, she got ill, and she had to go to Chicago to the hospital. And it was when she was gone that Mrs. Blanche Hahn Rash appeared here. And she had a child, and not long after, Bremer and Mrs. Rash disappeared. And it was, he severed his connection with the local firm, and it was the understanding that Bremer had married Mrs. Rash. And that Mrs. Rash had been married, or that they had been married. After Bremer's disappearance, you know, the first wife, Jenny Mae Springer Bremer, she returns to the city and her husband's gone. And so she took it up with an attorney, and by that time, Bremer was living in Colorado. So the first Mrs. Bremer, Jenny Mae Springer of Macocata, brought suit for divorce, and the decree was granted. So Arthur Bremer, we talked about in the last picture, he was married 3 times. So Jenny Mae Springer, the Macocata lady, and then the Blanche Hahn, that was married quite a few times, and then Mary Schneider, who he ended up staying married to her. And this is a picture of his third wife, then Mary, whom he had 5 children with, and she was the widow that had had 5 children. And now we get to Blanche Irene Hahn. Blanche Hahn, she received a lot of newspaper coverage involving several of her marriages. One to Arthur Bremer, that we just talked about, and the other to John Patrick Tiernan. And it appears that Blanche, a minister's daughter, was married 8 times in all. She was the mother of at least 3 children. And there's been some debate as to, you know, who the fathers of those children were, and So I'm not even going to attempt to try and figure that out. Bride seeks fourth hubby. So we're talking about lady in the last picture. Mrs. Vaughn of Tiernan divorce in more trouble. 1923, Mrs. Blanche Irene Pond Rush Tiernan Vaughn, bride of a day of Professor John Tiernan, the South Bend law professor involved in the famous Tiernan divorce case at South Bend, Indiana several months ago, has added one more disillusionment to her list of romances. So I take it that she met him then when he was helping her with the other divorce. She arrived here Friday to hunt for her fourth and most recent spouse. Professor Tiernan, who had joined his wife in a court action to try to prove that he was not the father of one of his wife's children, created a sensation by eloping to Crown Point and marrying Mrs. Blonde Hahn Brash, then known to him as Blanche Hahn, daughter of a Hansel, Iowa minister, just after being granted a divorce from his first wife. After the marriage, Professor Tiernan and his bride came to Chicago, and newspaper reporters invaded their apartment to inform the professor that his bride had a husband that was living. So Professor Tiernan immediately hurried back to South Bend, where the divorce decree had been set aside as a result of his elopement. He rejoined his first wife. Yeah. And his second spouse returned to her home in Iowa, declaring she would never trust another man. Yeah. Professor Tiernan and his first wife went to Brooklyn, New York, where he had the marriage to Blanche Hahn Rush annulled. The bride of a day, Friday, said that she had been married several months ago to Charles Thomas Vaughn, formerly part owner of a downstate newspaper. She met him on a visit to Chicago. They were married in Indiana and lived in Champaign, Illinois, and then in Marshalltown. Vaughn said she went to Peoria, so he went to Peoria after she had refused to sign notes for a loan to build a $12,000 hotel. He forbade her to join him, but wrote to her to meet him here, she said, adding that he had not shown up. And then she says again, if he does not come tonight, I will never trust another man, she said. November 22nd, 1922. The reconciliation of Professor John B. Tiernan and his wife blew up with a bang today when Mrs. Augusta Tiernan began to suspect that the professor had returned from Affinity Land, where he had married another only to avoid the pressure of the charge of bigamy. Mrs. Tiernan telephoned attorney George Sands to drop proceedings to have the professor's cross-bill against her suit for divorce dismissed. And then this headline appeared, Mrs. Tiernan divorced in Iowa. November 27, 1922. New wife of professor says he will remain by her, that the reconciliation with he and his former wife, was called off. Accompanied by her mother, Mrs. Hahn of Hansel, Mrs. Blanche Tiernan spent the day in the city in an effort to establish the fact through the court records of district court that she had the legal right to become Mrs. John P. Tiernan last Saturday at Indiana. In the event that she did so, Mrs. Tiernan says that Tiernan had promised that he would stand by her. Mrs. Tiernan said that she and Arthur Brimmer were married at Oskaloosa. In 1919, the divorce record shows that Mrs. Jenny Brimmer was granted a divorce from Arthur Brimmer on March 22nd, 1920. Mrs. Tiernan says that her marriage to Brimmer was illegal, hence there was no bar to her marriage to Tiernan. I think you probably are getting lost, right, about this time. Sorry. When seen by an Associated Press correspondent, Mrs. Tiernan said she had no statement to make. Then she denied that there was any truth in the report that Tiernan was going to repudiate his marriage with her, and said that Tiernan had sent her here to consult the records. Mrs. Tiernan says that when she became the wife of Brimmer, she was led to believe that he was divorced. So really, it wasn't her fault, So Brimmer had come from Joliet. We talked about that before with his first wife. And it was in 1919 that Brimmer had written his first wife and said he had fallen in love with another woman. And that was Mrs. Hahn, or Miss Hahn. And that they would go to the end of the world for one another. This is the woman that's been married like 8 times, yeah. So the first Mrs. Brimmer worked here here in Maquoketa for a time in restaurants, it said, and then from there she went to Cedar Rapids, and later she married a man from Grinnell. When asked if she expected Mr. Tierman, now we're talking about back to the lady that was married so many times, to join her, Mrs. Tiernan said that he had agreed to come if she wanted him, and if he were, she was to wire him. Mrs. Tiernan said, however, that it would not be necessary. Mrs. Tiernan's 2 children by her first husband, Rash, are with her mother at Hansel, Iowa. So Mrs. Tiernan has been looking all day for a Chicago newspaper man named Wilson, whom she said was to meet her here. He had cautioned her, he said, about giving out any interviews. Up to noon, Mrs. Tiernan still had not seen the reporter, but she expected to. Tiernan's bride awaits his return. November 28, 1922. She was waiting for her husband to come to her. Following a conversation with the former Notre Dame professor over the long-distance telephone, Mrs. Blanche Hahn Brimmer Tiernan announced she expected Tiernan to arrive Wednesday morning. Just what the conversation was about, Mrs. Tiernan has refused to reveal. But she said she was going to fight for her rights against the claims of Mrs. Augusta Tiernan. She believes Tiernan would demonstrate his loyalty to her as soon as doubts about the existence of another marriage bond are cleared up. County attorney declared he had been retained to investigate Mrs. Tiernan's number 2 previous marriage with Arthur Brimmer, so they're all tied up together, and that he would send the facts to Professor Tiernan. Mrs. Tiernan, then the ex-Mrs. Rash, married Brimmer at Oskaloosa, but Brimmer had another wife, as we said at the time, and was not divorced from her until the following year. So under the Iowa law, Mrs. Tiernan's marriage with Brimmer was void. Mrs. Brimmer was expected to go back to her parents, the Reverend and Mrs. Charles Hahn at Hansel, Iowa, and then return to Marshalltown for her expected meeting with Professor Tiernan. So in the end, Tiernan does go back to his wife. Not Dawn, not the one that was married all this time, but the other wife. The rest of them aren't quite as confusing. 1869, Byron marriage scandal. I don't know if this is the first name or the last name. I couldn't find any more about it. Mill Rock, Iowa has a Byron scandal. A fascinating fellow of that name made love to a nice girl whom he found sewing on her wedding dress. Introduced her to jilt her fiance, ran off with her and married her.
Wow.
It now appears that he has 2 wives already. Okay, so here's the one. Married 8 times. This is a fascinating one. John Sevilla Delano of La Harpe, Illinois, whose arrest on the charge of bigamy was noted, is a veteran of the Mexican and the Civil Wars. He married Matilda Poole of Norwich, Ohio, and deserted her in 1945. Then he married Mary Avery in Iowa, lived with her for 15 years. They had 4 children, and she died in childbirth. Then he married Hannah Conrose at Boscobel, Wisconsin, during the Civil War, and she died a few months afterwards. His next victim was Ellen Battles, also of Iowa, whom he deserted in 1867. And then he married Elizabeth Fritz at Boscobel, Wisconsin, and deserted her. And then he married Mary Holmes, and she met the same fate. And we get to our local gal. On February 14th, 1871, he married Mrs., it's either Maria or Mariah Fields at Iron Hills, Iowa. Then he married his 8th wife, Mrs. Sarah Atwater, at Fountain Green in 1884. So shown is one of Delano's wives, the back row on the far right. That is his 8th wife, referred to as Mrs. Atwater, Sarah Sally Duncan. and Delano was her second husband. So the Lancaster Examiner, Weekly New Era. April 25th, 1888, lively old soldier. John S. Delano of La Harpe was arrested for bigamy. On February 14th, 1871, he married Mrs. Fields at Iron Hills. They moved to Clinton, and there it was thought Delano was murdered by a man named Lyman Kellogg. He was assaulted by this person, but he wasn't killed. So he fled to La Harpe in either 1871 or 72, and then became a farmer in the area. And then he married his 8th wife, the one I just showed you the picture of, Mrs. Sarah Atwater at Fountain Green, February 1884. Fields when she found out that he was still alive, the 7th wife found out he was still alive, she came from Clinton and had him arrested for bigamy. And since he married that Mrs. Atwater, he made 2 more attempts to marry. Yeah. John Delano was living in La Harpe, Hancock County, Illinois at the time of his death in 1888, according to the Lancaster Examiner of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Matilda Poole was listed as his spouse, so I mean she was the first one to marry him. Shown is a group of Civil War vets at La Harpe, Illinois, taken before 1888, which is when John Delano died. So he's in the front row, second from the left, holding his hat. You'd never think that that man did all that, would you? You know, he looks pretty harmless.
Yeah.
Court documents shown sentence for bigamy in 1888, which happens to be the same year he died. Might have been the same month. The matrimonial ventures of John Delano of Illinois. He was arrested on the charges of bigamy as noted. From the Perry Chief, Perry, Iowa, a man with 8 wives, several of them in Iowa. John S. Delano, the man arrested at La Harpe for bigamy, has 8 wives, 6 of whom are still living. Wife number 7, Mrs. Marge Fields, married Delano at Iron Hills. Thinking that her husband was dead, she applied some years ago for a pension on account of her husband's service in the Mexican War. She was refused until recently, when the pension was granted, but it was almost immediately withheld, for the same reason that John Delano had applied for the pension. And in the affidavit, said that he was married to Sarah Atwater. The 7th wife was brought to La Harpe Wednesday and recognized her much-married husband. In reply to her explanation, "Oh, John, John," she said. He said, "Yes, Mariah, it is you." Delano is in jail here on a charge of bigamy, preferred by wife number 7. His record in this county is an unsavory one. He would have married a reputable widow had she not been warned by friends. Delano is 75 years old and is a veteran. We talked about that. So far as can be ascertained, Delano's wives who are yet living reside at or near the places where they were married. And he died, I guess I wrote here, he died the same month after being charged. The Delano genealogy. So they don't quite have it quite right. They say he was only married 2 times. So published in 1899 is vague on the life of John, the son of Nathaniel and Rebecca Smith Delano, a descendant of Richard Warren of the Mayflower. John Delano was born in Oneida, New York in 1812. And it listed that he was married first to Matilda Poole, which he was, and then had his second marriage as being the one in Iron Hills. It says after a few years of marriage to his first wife, he enlisted in the Mexican War. In 1847, after the Battle of Buena Vista, he wrote or caused someone to write home to his wife that he'd been killed. Well, that's how he got out of that. The Delano genealogy aroused a reporter's curiosity when he read this account. He read that he left her and was punished for desertion. So learning of the newspaper account, the reporter sent for the transcript. And so John was found, as we mentioned, living in La Harpe, Illinois, April 25th, 1888. The following story was printed in the Carthage Republican, the story of a Fountain Green farmer, preacher, and good neighbor. However, the next paragraph describes John S. Delano as a masher. I did look that up. Does anybody know what a masher is? Okay, kind of the nice version of that is that they approach women in public. I'll let you look up the other version. A veteran of 2 wars, an ex-pounder. Does anybody know what an ex-pounder is? So they like give their version. So he was an ex-pounder of the gospel. So he had, obviously a different version of that. Farmer and much married, who now occupies a lone cell in the county Bastille. His history is one of repeated marriage and desertions. He served in the Mexican War in 1846 under General Taylor, and also served in the Civil War, mustering in Louisville at the close of the war. While in jail, John is visited by that reporter who writes, "The old man lay on a cot in his cell and seemed to be suffering from fever. He looked pitifully haggard, and he was a sorry sight. To questions, he made answers in husky tones. He denied ever having but 3 wives." At this point, Delano had been a resident of Hancock County for about 10 years, living in Fountain Green Township. His occupations were varied, but for the most part, he had represented a preacher in various neighborhoods in the county. Although 76 years old, gray-haired, and apparently feeble, it was said he was as frisky as a clam at high tide.
Oh my
And
God.
he was a favorite with the fair sex, both young and old. His record as a masher, from all reports, is a brilliant one. About 4 years prior, John Delano was married to Mrs. Sarah Atwater, a very worthy lady, widow of the late Thomas Atwater of Fountain Green Township. She is highly connected in the county, and it is astounding that she or her friends were so long in ignorance of Delano's funny capers. However, it is said that he was a good provider, and that the 2 of them had lived together happily. Delano at that time was a sort of a farmhand working odd jobs and other labors. And he was generally regarded as a quiet, harmless old man. So, an account of his deeds, a veteran bigamist, is reported from a newspaper in the Albert Lee Enterprise newspaper archives, which states, "It is said that Delano," oh, I already said that, "had made 2 attempts to marry since his marriage to Mrs. Atwater." Yeah, so that's all on that. So I think you kind of could follow that one a little bit better than the last story. John Fox mourned by 3 wives. John Fox of Maquoketa disappeared Monday and cannot be found. Detectives are here searching for him, but thus far have not been successful. Several months ago, Fox went to Maquoketa and represented himself to be a man of means, owning large estates in the West. He was a huge swell and soon had a number of susceptible women at his feet. Among them was a wealthy widow, to whom he became attached, and in due time the pair were united in marriage. The honeymoon was happy but brief, and one night, under the influence of liquor, Fox made some remarks that aroused the suspicions of his wife. A few days later, a letter arrived, and it was finally discovered that Fox was the husband of 3 wives, from one of whom he had been divorced, and that numberless bills had been left unpaid by him in various parts of the country. It was arranged to arrest him last Sunday, but Fox got wind of the officer's purpose and fled, and was able to evade his pursuers. And then there was another article, basically that said the same. The officers proceeded to his house to arrest him Sunday, but found the bird had flown in the direction of St. Paul. Which, then it made mention that one of his wives had a sister there, so I don't know then. Don't know how he got hooked up with her. I didn't even try and go down that rabbit hole. Malcolm Pitcher, a white man, was arrested at Little Rock, Arkansas on charge of bigamy, preferred by Maquoketa authorities. I don't know who he married, but this was in the Saginaw News, Saginaw, Michigan, in 1892. A case of elopement. A short time since Eugene Girard, alias George Girard, eloped from Maquoketa with the wife of William Greenwood during the absence of the husband at St. Louis. The guilty pair took what property they could conveniently carry, sold the cow and other property belonging to the husband, and came to the city about 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, the injured husband arrived in pursuit, procured a warrant, and had the couple arrested. The affair, however, was amicably settled by the wife agreeing to go back to the husband, on the condition that he wouldn't prosecute George Girard. So Girard evidently had the best of the bargain, and this is the opinion of the newspaper writer. He ought to have been punished by being obliged to live with that woman. And then it says, the happy couple started last evening for their home, which is about 10 miles back of Dubuque on the Maquoketa. And this man then, that George or Eugene, he had been employed in a brickyard, so probably one of the ones here in Maquoketa. Rich Jackson. Spragueville is the seat of a sensation. The ghost sensation which caused the children of that vicinity to hide their heads under their bedclothes, men to run 7 miles, and Wilfred Dunham to sleep in his blacksmith shop with an anvil for a pillow, has gone. And I don't know what they're referring to there, you know, what happened. Only to be followed by another sensation, which is not a ghost but a reality. Rich Jackson, one of the firm of Jackson Brothers of that place, has vamoosed. Before going, he invited a number of his friends to attend his wedding, December 6, 1888. But on that very same night, he made his escape. The friends came. The girl he left behind was attired in a white silk dress. Her head was crowned with a wreath of artificial roses. The company sat in doleful silence. Suddenly, the Spragueville band broke forth in strain of marital music, followed by the shotgun, tin cans, and drum corps. The discord could be plainly heard in the vicinity of Preston, but we doubt if it did disturb the slumbers of Mr. Jackson, the would-be groom, because by then he was in Illinois. He had gone back to his family, which consisted of a wife and 5 children.
Oh.
L.D. McCoy. It is found that L.D. McCoy, the mayor of Andrew, Iowa, who absconded a year ago with the papers of the Hutchins estate, of which he was guardian, and leaving a wife who became insane and 3 children in the poorhouse, had a previous wife and child in Arizona, and they had been waiting all these years for his return. Shown is a list of persons liable for military duty in Jackson County. And if you notice, this is his name right there, and there's no age. So for some reason he didn't want to give him, you know, the age. That was going to give him away. So like some of the men that we talked about, they like moved a long ways away. And this man, you know, found that he could have a wife in Sebula and in Clinton and think that I would never catch up with him. So Frank S. McElroy, for many years a resident of Sebula, was arrested at Rock Island Tuesday morning. The police of that city, acting on information sworn out before Mayor McDowell in Sebula, charging him with desertion and living with another woman. Saturday evening, there appeared in Sebula a lady who claimed that she was married to Frank McElroy in Indiana about 2 years ago, and they had been living as man and wife at Rock Island. Oh, I guess I said Clinton, I meant Rock Island. Since that time, as Mr. McElroy is already married and has a wife living in Sebula, the charges made were very, very, very serious. But as the evidence presented seemed to justify such measures, information sworn out by Charles Smith, brother of Mrs. McElroy of Sebula, and a warrant for McElroy's arrest by the mayor McDowell, both of the ladies who are victims of McElroy's alleged perfidy are highly respected in their home communities, and the affair is a most regrettable one throughout. The accused man has been absent from Sebula the better part of the time during the past 2 years, and he was working in the real estate business. But he had made several visits here for a few days at a time. And this is his wife. In 1882, Franklin McElroy married Eliza Hollis, shown in the photo. And so she was his first wife, and they were the parents of William Franklin, Miriam Julia, Leroy, John Halbert, Joseph Lynn, Hetty Eliza. And it's said that they separated in the late 1890s, but there's no proof of divorce. And she and the children moved to Washington and later to Oregon. And that photo is of 4 of their children. And then he had married Louise Smith Dalkerts in 1904 in Iowa, but also they say there's no proof of that marriage, and they lived in Rock Island. And Franklin's buried in Evergreen Cemetery, not buried with either one of the wives. Okay, so this is a new one. Sensations fail of introduction. Evidence in bigamy case to be withheld until trial before jury. Youth accused as husband by 2 women who face him in court cannot get bonds. John Raymond McMullen, arrested recently in Cedar Rapids on a charge of bigamy, this morning was held to the grand jury in the sum of $1,000. In default of bonds, he was committed to the county jail to await trial. The courtroom was filled to overflowing with a curious crowd, which was expecting to hear some sensational evidence, but there was none introduced. The state's attorney explained that he would withhold a number of startling facts until the case came to trial in the circuit court. Both of the young bigamist wives were present, as were also the fathers of the young women. The defendant sat in the front seat alone. An effort was made by Ben Stewart, attorney for the young man, to have wife number 1, who was formerly Beulah Bodkins of Macokota, testify on the ground that she was not the defendant's wife, for the reason that he was not of age at the time of this marriage. And so I found that kind of interesting that that first wife was willing to say that no, they really weren't legally married, and they had a child together. So it's just, this is kind of a sad one because they were really young. But this was denied in court. They wouldn't let her do that because they said that she was the defendant's lawful wife and therefore could not give evidence. So when his first wife, then Beulah Beatrice Bodkin, she was just 9 years old, when her mother had died, and she and McMullen had married at, about age 16 in 1912, and then their son was born that next year. So John Bodkins, father of the first wife, was the first witness called. He said he had known McMullen for 3 or 4 months prior to the marriage. And I think he had lost, McMullen too, had lost his father at a young age. He said the couple married September 1912 and that he, Bodkins, had obtained the license. So the father of the bride had obtained the license. And McMullen had said he had his mother's consent, but he really didn't. So Claire Bloomquist, wife number 2, stated that the ceremony had been performed by the Reverend William Shaw. After the marriage, they returned to Rock Island and lived with her parents. And she had met McMullen in 1911, which was the year before his first marriage. She'd met him in DeWitt, so he would have just been, 14, 15 years old. John Raymond McMullen, bigamy charge fails to stick. Case against John Raymond McMullen is dismissed by court in Peoria. He was cleared of bigamy charge today. It was held his marriage to Miss Beulah Bodkin was invalid because he was a minor and he didn't have the proper consent of a parent. The second marriage in Peoria in 1937 with Miss Clara Bloomquist, therefore, was held not to be bigamous. McMullen will plead guilty to perjury and get a workhouse sentence. And in the 1920 census, Clara Bloomquist then was living with her parents and her 5-year-old son, Harold. So both of those women had a son. And then there is a telegram that says of much local interest. McMullen was indicted here in a charge of bigamy, but it was dismissed. And then he was immediately rearrested and taken to Peoria, where the alleged offense was committed, the marriage license being granted there. And the Rock Island girl was recently given a divorce. McMullen came here from Jackson County. He is said to have married a girl here and deserted her coming to the city. He was employed at one of the local livery barns. In March of this year, he persuaded Miss Bloomquist to go with him to Peoria, where he was married without securing a divorce from his first spouse. The latter came to Rock Island to work, so that's how she found him. She found that he had been married. And then she's the one that contacted wife number 2. And then he disappeared. So he died, he died in 1985, and he was married 4 or 5 times in all. Retired as a meat cutter, and I think he's buried in Mount Hope Cemetery. This is a photo of wife number 3, Mary Pickett Berkeley. And they were married in Clinton in 1937. A.B. Sessions, elopement extraordinaire. The way a Minneapolis man ran away with wife of a respectable Iowa innkeeper. The male subject of our article is a man named A.B. Sessions, a rather prepossessing man with a sorrel, mustache, and hair to match. The latter always parted in the middle with a few strawberry curls protruding down over the forehead. His dress was not extravagant, while his habits were extremely subtle. He first struck Preston about the last of May or the 1st of June, hailing from Minneapolis, where he left a highly respectable wife and family. On his arrival, he hired out to Messrs. Day and Hobart, and they have the farm implement business, as a salesman of the implements, representing that he had been in the employ of the Hubbard Reaper Works at Minneapolis, which was true, but it also proved to be true that he had been fired from there on the account of drunkenness. But inasmuch as he showed symptoms of reform, Mr. Hobart hired him at a salary of $80 per month plus expenses. And Sessions, in the meantime, began taking up board and lodging at the Preston House, which was kept up by John K. Miller. Time wore apace. Sessions proved to be an expert at business. He made numerous sales, but his expense account, he was charging over $100 a month. And so Mr. Hobart found that he was too expensive to keep in his employ. And so at the end of 2 months, he discharged him. And Sessions still hung around, lingered near the Preston House, especially near the landlady. And in the meantime, speculations were rife as to his intent and purposes. He took the landlady out riding, and he carried her wood, and watered the kitchen, and he sliced up the beefsteak, and he tended bar for the landlord, which was her husband, helped himself to the wine and cigars, and in fact, he was a general utility man, such as no well-regulated hotel could do without. And this went on until about December 1st. And then his lease of the Preston House had expired. And so actually Mr. Miller didn't own the business, so he had a lease on that Preston House. And so Mr. Miller was going to have to leave. And so said he was engaged in the irksome task of removing all of his household effects. And that's when the elopement took place. Sessions and his paramour succeeded in stealing a portion of Mr. Miller's household goods, secreting them at the residence of Mr. Danforth. Seemed I'd heard that name before. I was thinking Danforth, but he was somebody important, but he allowed this to happen. And they're boxed and shipped to Minneapolis in Sessions' name. and his dear Anna, remaining at Danforth 1 or 2 days. And then Sessions went back to his former employer, tears in his eyes, and said he just begged for $5 to go back to his dear wife and children. So Mr. Hobart complied with the request, not because he owed him anything or that he expected to get it back, just wanted the man to leave. He just wanted to get him out. He said that there had been a stench in the nostrils of respectable people for 6 long months. He just wanted him out. So on the morning of December 1st, while Mr. Miller was at Springville arranging his domestic affairs for the welfare and reception of his devoted wife, on that day the man with the sorrel mustache and his wife were swiftly gliding up the river railroad at the rate of 25 miles an hour. And not until he arrived in Preston was he aware of the elopement. He had regarded Sessions as a friend. He boarded him all summer long, allowed him to drink his bar dry, smoke up his cigars, and finally run away with his wife. We have it on good authority, says the Minneapolis Tribune, that Sessions brought the landlord's wife to the city, took her into his own home, making a plausible excuse to his wife. And she was able to stay there for several weeks, but was finally ousted when the news of the elopement reached Mrs. Sessions. And the landlord forwarded a photograph of his wife to the chief of police and has requested that the official to hunt her up and send her home. Sessions is well known around town. The story of the Preston paper is vouched for by the best of citizens here. J.C. Pitkin. Jackson County will lose its reputation if it keeps on. At Sebula, J.C. Pitkin, an old citizen of that town and the father of a grown-up family, has eloped to parts unknown with a Mrs. Leonard, who leaves a husband and children behind. And Cottonville has a scandal of the Beecher complexion. I don't know what that means, but it says, the only difference being that the Cottonville rake didn't see a cave of gloom, as Beecher did, but a young, married woman's bedroom in her husband's absence. And so this is the wife then that he left. And I don't know if, I don't think they got divorced, but I don't think they got together, but this is her obituary. Tribute to a noble woman, August 10th, 1906. Remains of Mrs. Maria A. Pitkin's laid to rest yesterday. Mother of Frank Pitkin, whose death occurred on Tuesday at Owine. And it said she was in her 75th year. She was united in marriage in 1851 to Joseph Case Pitkin. And they were the parents of Joseph and Alfred and William and Lizzie and Frank. And that Mr. Pitkin had died about 25 years ago. And she had since made her home with her daughter, Mrs. W.H. Burgum. And so her husband was the one mentioned, and they're running off with everyone. So that was the last story. Does anyone have any questions? Comments about this? And I'm sure this was just a small handful of the stories out there. Wish I could have found more pictures.
Thank you. Thank you so much.